Hi, Jonas.
Hi, Nate.
Good to have you here.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be on the platform.
For sure. I think before we start, I just want to sort of briefly introduce you so people have an understanding of where we might go with the conversation.
Cool.
Yes, so your name is Jonas Ileka.
Ileka, yeah.
Ileka, right. And you're the People and Culture Manager at the WWF, which is the World Wildlife Fund.
Yeah,
You
correct.
have over 10 years of experience in human resource management in various industries like education, logistics, just to mention a few. You're also a certified trainer,
Yeah.
certified coach, and professional speaker.
Yeah.
And I think right now you sort of spearheading the 4-day work week initiative in Namibia. Right?
That's correct, yeah.
Which I think is something that's interesting now, like also to touch on a little
Sure.
bit. Yeah. So I think firstly, I sometimes make the mistake of when I'm introducing myself, like let's say I do software engineering. When I'm introducing myself to people, I would tell them that that's what I do and sort of expect them to understand what that means. You know?
Yeah.
So if you were to define a human resource manager in your point of view, how would you define that?
All right. So yeah, and I mean, human resources, it's very often misunderstood. I think the common understanding is that you hire and fire people.
Yeah.
And that's the same understanding that I went into the course with.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe to take a few steps back, and just explain a bit how I ended up in human resources. So when I was in high school, I had actually gotten a scholarship to study architecture, which is what I always wanted to do, either architecture or engineering. But the school year was only starting in September, and actually I hadn't done so well in my maths in grade 12. So I was improving, waiting for that September. And then I decided I'm afraid of brain drain, so I can't just be doing one course, improving one course or upgrading one course. So I decided to enroll at the then Polytechnic for human resources. And I've always heard about human resources, but that was my understanding. People that hire and fire people. But I went in for the reason of, if I'm going to be in a technical field, like software engineering, like architecture, you also need those softer skills, people skills.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, human resources, let me do that. And I actually ended up completely falling in love with the course by the second semester and decided to stay. So human resources is very broad. I think it's one of the most broad careers that you can find. There's probably over 30, if not 50 specializations.
Okay.
But basically, you deal with the most important asset or resource in a company, which is the people. So you bring in talent, you help that talent and assess how they're doing. You put them on training, you monitor their performance, you place them in the right positions. So it's very, very broad, but essentially you work with the people within the company to help the company do better through its people.
Okay, nice. So basically, so you're not just in the hiring process, you also, when you have the people, you manage the people inside.
Exactly.
Have you done a bit of hiring? Do you fall in that space as well?
Yes. I've done quite a bit of hiring, especially early on in my career. I was working on a project, for example, for Namport, where I hired I think probably over 100 people in a space of about 6 months, because it's a big project. So yeah, hiring is quite a big part of my profile and experience. Yeah.
Okay. So when you hire, when you look at somebody's CV, for instance, do you just focus on the skills and the requirements that you have? Let's say if you're looking for a software developer, there's obviously everyone that's applying is a software developer. You know, so how do you single out people?
Sure. So I think, and this is in hindsight, having been in the industry for just about 13 years now, I think there's two parts to it. There's obviously the compliance part, because before you hire someone, you put out a scope in terms of in the form of an advert. And that advert is informed by a job description, which is a list of the duties and responsibilities. Then you summarize them in an advert. So there's a compliance element to say, okay, we've listed that we're looking for someone with a master's degree or a bachelor's degree with this many years of experience. So that's what you look for on the CV. But on the other hand, which I think is you develop it over time, some people have it naturally, is you need to be able to sort of read between the lines and also just intuitively sense what type of person you're dealing with. So you might find someone who has very few years of experience, but when you look at their CV and, you know, how they formatted it and what they've actually included in there and some of the projects that they've been involved in, you realize that we might have a strong candidate here, we might have a talent here. So sometimes it's not just about sticking to what you have on the advert, but it's also reading between the lines and giving people an opportunity. Say, let's let's see what this guy is about, or let's see what this lady is all about.
Okay. So basically, if I'm the person applying, for instance, what should I focus on? People say you should have it shorter. Let's say your CV. What are the sort of specifics that you would say play a role in you sort of singling out this person?
Sure. So there's quite a bit of information around all of those things on the internet. Some of it is not so correct, but most of it is actually correct. So I think I'm not going to go into too many of the details. But one of the most important things, especially on the CV, is don't have a generic CV that you send to all the companies. Your CV should really be responsive to the advert that was placed. What I see a lot of people doing is they just basically go to their job descriptions, take everything that's on there, paste it on the CV, and then they send it through. But what you need to do is actually to tailor it. If an advert is asking for specific experience, let's say it's an HR officer position, and they're looking for someone with recruitment experience and someone that is able to do payroll. And in your current role, yes, you do recruitment and payroll, but you do 100 other things. And you take those 100 things and you put them on your CV. It becomes a bit difficult for me to pick those out. But if you tailor it and you put payroll and recruitment at the top and a few others that are related to what we are looking for, then your chances are actually better, because we receive like 1,800 applications. So the time and the attention is not that much. But generally, in terms of the CV, what we are looking for is obviously your experience. So you list that in your current position or your last position that you've held, and you list which company it's with and some of the duties that you've been doing. We're also looking at your education profile. What's your highest qualification? What other qualifications do you have? Have you done any other short courses? You can also list your skills. Again, this should be relevant to the position that you're applying for. And of course, then you need to have your references as well. People that we can call and ask, in terms of your character, in terms of your previous work. And, sometimes people lie on their CVs. And so for us as HR practitioners, we sometimes call and say, okay, Nate said he was involved in this project where he implemented something. Is this true? What was his involvement, etc., etc. So references are very important. But you can also go over and above that. You can also, maybe list some projects that you were involved in, things that you initiated, list, even non-work related things, maybe pro bono consulting or voluntary work, anything that you think is going to make you a better candidate or make you stand out from the rest of the pool.
Yeah. So basically what I took from this is, if you're applying to a specific job, it's better to have an understanding of what are the daily tasks, or sort of like what they would require. For instance, some companies you would see, they say they're a software development company, but it's not necessarily generic. They could simply be just doing one specific thing. Let's say software is quite broad. They could just be doing Python, or they could just be running scripts. They're not necessarily. So if you have a CV that emphasizing on like specific things, you might want to tailor it so it suits the specific job description.
100%.
Okay. So so now they've made it through the CV. You call them, they come into an interview. What are sort of like the interview experiences that you have experienced? Let's say, let's start with the bad ones. What was sort of like a bad interview experience?
I think before I touch on the CV, on the interview, maybe let me touch on the cover letter as well, because that's really sort of the main document, or the document that stands out. The CV, it's more for me to compare what I'm looking for against what you have. But the cover letter tells me more about who you are as a person. So in terms of your writing ability, your attention to detail, for example, you'll find someone that is just sending the same cover letter, even forgets to change the name of the company. And then on the good side, you find someone that goes the extra mile and actually finds out, who am I writing to? And then say, dear Mr. Ileka, or dear Jonas. And that makes you stand out. And the other thing about a cover letter is, it's not necessary for you to repeat the information that you have on the CV, but you can summarize it in terms of your highest qualification and the years of experience, especially because you're responding to an advert. But the key is really to keep it short. Again, attention span, and obviously we're dealing with many applications. In Namibia, there's an employment challenge, So a lot of people are unemployed,
Yeah. Sorry, on the, what's the feel of the cover letter? I usually don't understand, because I would think, okay, sometimes there would be a cover letter section, but then you'd be, okay, my CV sort of explains everything.
Yes.
But what feel do you go in with the cover letter? Is it like who am I, or like how personal should it be?
Sure. I think the key is to write to someone. I think that's one thing that people don't do. They just write a cover letter. It's a document that I send. But you need to write to someone and say, I'm applying for this job. This is what qualifies me, or this is what makes me an ideal candidate. And this is my value proposition, or what makes me stand out from everyone else. If you're able to do this in 3 short paragraphs of, let's say, 3 lines each, then perfect. As I said, what we really look for, especially in the cover letter, is it tells us a bit more about who you are as a person, how you approach the cover letter, how you write, what you say. This is what differentiates between the person that we call and the person that we send a regret email. Yeah.
Perfect.
So maybe to touch on the interview, you said some of the bad experiences.
Yeah.
I don't think I've had too many bad experiences with candidates. I think there's basics though, like arriving on time. There's also, you can overdo it as well. Don't arrive too early, because then now you see everyone moving around and you see the other candidates as well. It might, get your nerves running. But probably one common mistake that I always see people do in interviews is being a bit overconfident or overbearing. It's a very fine balance. Obviously, you don't want to be timid.
Yeah.
You want to be authentic. You want to be yourself, but you also don't want to come in there and start shaking people's hands and just be all over the place. I've seen that a few times. And yeah, so I think we just finding that balance and also reading the room. It's very, very important. Another mistake is if you don't know an answer, I wouldn't advise you to say, I don't know. There's always something that you do know, even if it's not really answering the interview question. So I would rather say, I would always advise people to rather say, I'm not too familiar with that concept, or I don't have experience in that area, but A, B, C, and D, So just something that you do know. So for example, they ask you, how do you go about hiring a CEO? And you've never done that. So a typical answer would be like, I don't have exposure, or I've never hired a CEO. But my understanding is that it's not so different from when you hire an ordinary person. It's the same process. However, maybe you'd want to have more assessments because it's a higher level position. So that would be a good answer rather than saying, I don't know, or I don't have experience in that. Yeah, but I think generally Namibians are quite good in terms of interviewing. I think it's just exposure, really. So things like mock interviews, or just sitting with someone and running through a few questions, that really goes a long way just to prepare you. And I think just being able to control your nerves is also very, very important.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. So basically, for the most part with interviews, because you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
So would you say sort of like people skills would be a plus for an interview? Because you find, depending on the field that the person does, sometimes it's easy to just be extremely focused on what you do. If you're like a physicist, you just know physics deep, but when it comes to actually getting your ideas across, it's difficult. So do you think, how can I put this? You can have someone that's really, really good in what they do, but they can't, sort of express themselves.
Yeah.
Would you be able to sift that out, or do you want a person to be balanced in people's skills, or not? Sure. How do you sift those differences?
Cool. That's a really, really good question. And I would say really depends on who's on the other side of the table in terms of the panel. But best practice is you need to be able to pick up when someone doesn't know something and when they're just nervous. You also need to know when someone is introverted, especially the technical skills. You find like IT people, they tend to be a bit, introverted. But you need to pick that up. Say this person is just an introvert, but they do know what they're talking about. You also need to be able to pick up when there's a language barrier, especially in Namibia, especially people from northern Namibia, or at least that's how it was. They're not that good, or some of them aren't that good in English. So you need to be able to put that to the side and actually focus on what the person is saying and what they know. So I think those are some of the softer skills that as an HR practitioner or as a recruitment officer you need to have. But again, like I said, it depends on who's sitting on the other side of the table. But if you want to hire the right person, you don't want to lose a candidate just because they were nervous, just because they're an introvert, or just because of a language barrier, if language is not really a big part of the job. But I think generally, in terms of what you spoke to now, is what makes you stand out as a candidate is if you've got skills that are sort of outside of what is normally expected in your field. So if you're an IT person, like the example I gave, but you're well-spoken, that will make you stand out. If you're an HR person, but you know softwares or you're very good analytically, that makes you stand out. You always need to have something that other people in your field sort of don't have. Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Especially if it complements the work that you're going to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, true. But the funny thing is, like, expressing yourself. I think if you're a candidate, it's probably one of the skills you would want to emphasize on.
Yeah.
Because inside a company, it's different from school and everything.
Yeah.
It's one thing I've noticed, and it's almost like if you don't, you might know certain things, but if you don't know how to bring it across, because you would find somebody that has the answer in like a group meeting, but because they just don't know how to bring it across, they would kind of, the person that's the loudest, it's not necessarily the best,
Yes,
you know,
or the smartest.
exactly. But just because they perceptively, it's perceived that way because they all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So would you say focusing on sort of like projecting yourself vocally is important?
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, we've always had these situations where, for example, kids or candidates that went to private school tend to get jobs better because of how they present themselves. It's like if you have a product, right? I mean, if I've got this phone, but I can't articulate why this phone will benefit you, then you might not want it. But if I can find a really creative way to tell you why this is the best phone, then you're more likely to get it. So it's all about influence. So it's very important for candidates and just people in general to learn how to express themselves in a clear, concise, and compelling way. And a big part of that is really public speaking skills, people skills, as you mentioned earlier. Just being able to read the room and say, okay, Nate is this type of person, so probably I need to communicate to them in this way. And just those small things like mentioning someone by their name, things like that. But I think it's really important for you to know what your value is, your unique value proposition or unique selling point, and being able to convey that in those three areas really in a concise and compelling manner. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Managing people is something that you do as well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so what would you say? Because people are different, and people come from different backgrounds, different sort of cultures, and how would you go about sort of attaining to everybody's, trying to make everybody feel happy, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the key is that, right? You can't make everyone happy. And I think for a lot of sort of young leaders and young managers, the first thing that you quickly learn, if you didn't know, is that leadership is not a popularity contest. And if you try to make it that and try to please everyone, you're going to fail terribly and you're going to fail everyone else. My sort of philosophy on leadership, I think, is summarized in one quote. I can't remember who said it, but it goes, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it's less about being in front, it's all about servitude and sort of leading from the back, making everyone, enabling your team. Because if your team shines, then you shine as a leader as well, although it's not about you. And then it's a balance. Another thing is also, it's not always about thinking about yourself less or belittling yourself, or thinking. It's not about thinking less of yourself or belittling yourself, but it's just thinking of yourself less. And by that I mean it's not always about you. You need to put your team first. So leadership it's a very interesting one and a very tricky one. But I think if you want to do it right, those are some of the things that you need to do. Lead from the back and care about your people even beyond the 8 hours that you spend together. Take interest in what they do over the weekend, how their family is doing, that sort of thing. And just finding a balance also to not let the relationship be too casual or informal, especially if you're a young leader and especially if you're leading older people and diverse teams.
Yeah, but obviously with leadership, there would be times where you need to correct people, and my experience is people don't take correction good, right? Because it's obviously you single them out and the ego gets killed in some way. So how do you approach that? Because obviously, as a good leader, some people would make the mistake of being too nice.
Yeah.
Like you're too nice, you sort of blend in easily with everybody. So they tend to sort of classify you as one of them. So when it's time for you to tell them what to do, it's like, we've been doing all this fun stuff together.
Yeah.
It's a bit, it's a bit difficult. But
Yeah.
but how do you keep that balance? How would you, if you find someone that repetitively keeps doing the same thing over and over and over again, how would you sort of reprimand them?
Sure. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. Like in my experience, I've only led one person that was younger than me. It's always been people that are older than me.
That must be interesting.
So that's quite tricky, because sometimes you talk to someone and then the way they look at you is like, you know that you're younger than my son, right? So, and it's an African context. I'm not saying everyone or people, all of the people on my team were like that, but you do find one or two people that are like that. So it's quite tricky. And I think what is important is very clearly from the onset, setting the tone, not to say, I want this done this way, but just letting them know what are your non-negotiables. And then also broadening their horizon to realize that it's not a Jonas thing. This needs to be this way because of company policy or because of where we want to go as a team. So I think making that very clear, to say these are my non-negotiables, or this is what we don't do or what we do as a team, and then being consistent. Because if Nate does something today and I let it slide, and then Selma does something tomorrow and I want to, sort of pounce on her, then it's a problem. And then also if I have a non-negotiable and someone crosses it and I don't take action, again, then there's sort of cognitive dissonance there. So I think those are the two most important things. And then the last one, I think, is just being fair, and also taking circumstances into consideration. Someone might have done something wrong, but then there are sort of like mitigating factors or reasons why they might have acted in that way. So you need to be fair in assessing how or why the person did what they did, and then taking an action on that. And then I think just general fairness, and it speaks to consistency again. If we don't do this, whoever does it, doesn't matter. Even if yourself, you need to sort of take accountability for it and admit to say, guys, I haven't done what I said in this instance.
Okay. Nice. If someone would want to become an HR or want to pursue HR, what personality type do you think you need to? Because I think at the very fundamental of HR is psychology, because you're dealing with people for the most part.
100%,
yeah. What would you say your interests were? If you were to, let's say, if you were to define yourself, because most of the time when you meet people, you just, oh no, he's just an HR person, he's a software developer. But how would you personally define yourself?
I'm passionate about people, and I think that's like, if you want to make it in HR and go far in HR, you need to be passionate about people, and you need to be patient. I think that passion comes with being patient, because human beings are not the easiest. I almost said people to do. But it's not easy to deal with human beings. We've got a lot of emotions, different personalities, different dynamics. So if you have passion, then whatever challenges, because it is a very challenging and taxing field. Sometimes you need to fire people. I've had to fire someone that I was in the same grade.
That must be very hard.
Yes, a former classmate. I had to fire the person. So if you've got a passion, and I think that's the key really, and probably this is the key to any field, but more so for the challenging ones. So you need to have that love for people and wanting people to reach their full potential, helping people grow. I think that's the driving force. In terms of personality, I think, I'm not too sure if it's a personality thing, but I think you need to have a very high emotional intelligence. Very, very, very important. And self-awareness as well, because people are going to test you and push you to boundaries. So how do you react in those difficult moments? So I think emotional intelligence. So both an introvert can be an HR person, an extrovert can be an HR person. But I think if you got a passion and love for people, and you've got a high emotional intelligence, then I think you can make it in the field.
Okay, nice. I would just want to touch on the firing thing. What would it take to fire somebody? Have you gone through quite a bit of like, don't do this, strike one, strike two, strike three, or is it just like, again, I might have hired the wrong person?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it depends. Most companies have what we call a schedule of offenses or matrix that clearly states to say, this is this type of offense. Say, for example, theft. In most companies, theft doesn't matter if it's a pencil, doesn't matter if it's $1 million. It's a automatic dismissal. But obviously, you have to go through a disciplinary process where you get the evidence, get a few witnesses in, and establish that this person indeed stole. So it doesn't matter what the reason is for stealing, but in most organizations, theft, for example, is an automatic dismissal. Then you find other things, like let's say you had a verbal confrontation with a supervisor, which is classified as insubordination. Again, you look at the mitigating factors, you collect evidence, then you go through a disciplinary process, and that could be anything from a verbal warning to a written warning. But most companies have that laid out clearly, yes, and that helps as well HR practitioners and supervisors to be fair and consistent.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, since you have a passion for people, right? I was at this conference recently, and there was a question where it was at NAS, right? So there was a question where part of the students, because the panel was emphasizing on the importance of working as much as you can, making yourself the best version of yourself as much as you can, like sort of introducing yourself in certain spaces where you meet people, networking and all that. And one of the students said, like, sometimes you might do all that, but there's just not enough work or jobs for everybody.
Yeah.
Like, so they asked, like, what's the solution to unemployment? And there was like this, nobody actually has a clear solution, because it's sort of like a problem that's pervasive everywhere. But I think right now our unemployment rate is over 50-something%. What are your thoughts about unemployment?
I mean, this will probably be controversial, but I think I have the answer. I really do think I've thought really hard and long about this challenge of unemployment, and I've done a lot of research on it. And I think it's it's all about reverse engineering, right? Getting sort of to the first principles. What is the root of unemployment in Namibia? In my view, the root of unemployment is the market is simply too small. We're not industrialized. I mean, industries create mass employment. So we're not industrialized, and now we're moving at a really, really good pace into the sort of 5IR, and we're now in the 4th industrial revolution, and we're moving really well in the 5th industrial revolution. I mean, we're getting 5G now. They're testing 5G. So that obviously creates problems, because we're now going to start automating, and we're not industrialized, meaning that there's going to be less jobs. I mean, that's just the reality. So I think the solution is really having a talent strategy, and I'm happy that Namibia is working towards a human resources strategy that also involves a strategy for our people and how we can get employment. And I think it's looking at alternative sectors as well. So first one is industrialization. We're opportune that we have a port, so it's very easy to industrialize. I mean, the amount of, every now and then I look at the reports from our port, the stuff that are going through our port. So you've got like products from Ghana, from Zimbabwe, from inland that are going through our ports that either we could add value to before they go out, or those same products we can produce here and actually export, and that will create employment in terms of industrialization. But I think the other arm is also alternative employment, alternative sources of income, especially in sports. I mean, we're like, what, 3 million now? But we have world champions in boxing, in athletics, and rowing, all these things. So Namibia is very talented, at least in my opinion. So if we can look at sports, for example, and really do sports development from a grassroots level, as early as preschool, really have coaches at schools and training these people, after school programs, I think we're going to produce like good sports people. So sports is one. The arts, especially the film industry, we've got a very unique landscape. I mean, I've traveled once from Oranjemund all the way up to the north, and just seeing the diversity in this. So it's good for shooting films, and a lot of movies have been filmed here. So if we can really attract, I'm not sure what they call these people, but the people that come and scout locations, location scouts and stuff like that, we develop through our colleges, our art colleges, actors, and camera people and all of this. And we develop the art scene more, especially when it comes to film. I think we're going to create a lot of employment. Of course, it's not going to be sustainable, meaning that you're not going to have a job that probably pays you a pension, but it's better than just sitting at home. And then other things like agriculture, teaching people, especially vocational skills, teaching people to be able to have skills that they can leverage on, even if you don't have formal employment and you live in the street and they know you as the guy that fixes the microwaves or the refrigerators, you're still able to make an income for yourself. So I think industrialization and looking at alternative industries, I think that's really, really important. But the biggest one, and it's something that I really want to see how I can contribute to, is helping our people find jobs elsewhere in the world, because the market is just so small.
True.
Right? So you can be here and working for Microsoft. You're working here, but you're working for a Silicon Valley company, for example. Very possible. Other African countries have already started leveraging on that through remote work, but also sending our people out there, whether it's in the hospitality industry or any other industries, and they go out there and we have a plan to make sure that they return, so that there's no brain drain, because you can lose your people and they all go, the best people especially, they all go to Dubai and go work there. But if we have a strategy and we keep track and we know this person is doing well in Finland, this person is doing well in the States, and we attract them back with that international exposure and mindset and come here and develop industries, I think that's the key. So those three, in my view, I mean, it's easier said than done.
Exactly.
But I think that's where we need to focus on.
Yeah. I mean, that's at least an answer. Like that's an answer at least. But so for the most part, from what you said, it looks like the majority of the solution comes from the government, because you said we need to be industrialized, so that means the government is not doing what it's supposed to be doing in terms of this sector, right? Why do you think no one has sort of, or why are they not prioritizing in that space?
Sure. Well, look, I don't think it's the government's baby. I think it's all of us as a country. And my feeling and what I'm always advocating for is especially the HR community. We have a really, really big part to play, whether it's in terms of having these conversations, contributing to national strategies like the Human Resources Plan, thinking out of the box and really giving the solutions, because solutions don't come from Parliament, really. Parliament, it goes to Parliament and they discuss it there and decide. So we can't expect Parliament to be the ones coming up with ideas. My advocacy is more on the HR community, for us to think beyond our small paperwork, and for the companies that we're working for, and really think broader in terms of our profession, in terms of talent, employability, employment creation, and how we can do that. Government obviously has an important role to play, and their role is more of enabling in terms of the policies, in terms of these conferences, especially policies that deal with, for example, remote work. You see government is pushing now through the NIPDB to bring in investors that can come and set up the industries. You see what's happening in the energy space with green hydrogen and stuff like that. So there is something that the government is doing. Where the government needs to strengthen, I think, is more on the sports and alternative industries. I think they're not doing as well as they should. Our sports development is not where it should be. In terms of arts and crafts, I think as a country, generally, we don't really respect our creatives. But also, I think there's not enough enabling things in terms of policy, in terms of funding for arts to thrive. So in terms of industrialization, government, I think, is flourishing. This is where we need to focus on. And in terms of these sort of opportunities and people going out into the diaspora and so forth, I think it's a collective responsibility.
Sure. How would you bridge the gap between, because like you said, it's let's say it's everybody's responsibility, right? But now, like there's obviously the government, which is the one that's sitting on top, let's say on the whatever high echelon, like a pyramid, and down is like the everyday people, and in between those are the people like the HR and the ones
that's
you mentioned.
a really good analogy. Yeah.
So now, if I'm down here and I have sort of like an idea that I actually see, let's say for instance, if you're an author, let's say, and that's not really maybe an author or a singer. It's not really an industry that's emphasized here, because what helps people to excel is if there's sort of like a body that regulates certain things, and then they reward you for certain things. And they'd say, if at school, when you see some people just study because they know at the end of the year they want to stand on top of that podium, and you say, it's the 10 best students. You know, some people just want to do that, so that motivates people to excel. You know? So if you discover sort of like a industry that's not being emphasized on, how would you climb up for them? Because the decision makers are on top. right? How would you how would you take that approach?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one, but I do think in Namibia we are privileged that there's a lot of consultation. I think 2 years ago I had the opportunity to go to State House by invitation by the office of our late president, may soul rest in peace, where there was annual youth engagement, president's youth engagement, and the president had an advisor on youth matters. So there are all these sort of roads that will give and platforms that give voices to young people, and not just young people. I think the more experienced guys have the wisdom. So there are all these platforms, national conferences. There's also what do you call it? Sort of industry bodies and associations that feed into government. So there's a lot of platforms, and I think the beauty of Namibia is also there's a lot of freedom. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a bit about this later. For example, I'm driving the 4-day week, and I've had opportunity to engage government, and they're not saying don't do this. They have questions and concerns how it's going to work and how it's going to affect the economy, because that's their responsibility. But for the most part, they welcome new initiatives. So I think we're fortunate in that sense that you can actually start something yourself and get a few like-minded people, get a multidisciplinary team that can drive it, and government won't stand in your way unless it's a policy thing. And that's, I think, the only blockage really. So there are some restricting policies, not so much. I think Namibia is an easy place to do business and generally to do initiatives, but there are policies that might be restricting. Yeah.
Oh, nice. So basically, instead of saying like going barehanded to them, you might as well just go and say, okay, I've done this so far.
Yeah.
This is the reports. These are the statistics that I've uncovered. And then that might make it easier for you.
Exactly, because it's all about I think, and I love that we're slowly moving out of this sort of victim mentality where people just used to, especially when there's a platform, it's just complaints. People are actually saying, look, I'm in this space, I'm doing A, B, C, and D. How can we work together? And you're then being pointed to the right office. That the engagement that I mentioned 2 years ago, the president literally, there were like 3-4 people. President literally said, contact this person, or actually gave an instruction to one of his people and say, please get in touch with that gentleman or with that lady. So it's about coming with a solution. Of course, being able to really define what the problem is and what you think are the root causes and what you think where we can do better, but not just being stuck in this is a problem or complaining and stuff, but also actually coming up with solutions, or say, I've got the solution, can we try and see if it can work? And for the most part, government is quite open, and other players as well, because government is not just the only player.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I think it obviously just removes, like you said, the victim mentality. So it empowers people to take initiative, because if you keep saying it's the government, people tend to just sit down and wait forever.
Exactly. It's a cheap way out. Yeah, it's a cheap way out. I think we all need to take responsibility for our lives and our destiny. Government is there to enable. If government is not enabling, of course, we need to call them out. But I think the thing of just pointing fingers the whole time and not really getting to the solution is not healthy.
Yeah. The 4-day work week, what triggered your interest into pursuing that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, my passion is human resources, and in my last year of varsity, I actually had the idea to start a sort of, I realized that it was misunderstood because of my own wrong and preconceived sort of ideas of what HR is all about. So I realized that people don't really understand what HR is, and people also, even those in HR, don't actually know what our power and our role is. So in my last year, I had this idea of starting a sort of it was supposed to be a newspaper where we're going to share job opportunities. We're going to talk about the trends and everything happening in HR, both here in Namibia and abroad. And it took me about 10 years to actually execute the idea, because I just didn't know where to start. I approached a few people. Some didn't really buy into it. Some didn't understand how it was going to work. It took me about 10 years of experience to know, okay, this is how I need to do it. So last year we launched Pulse HR Network, which publishes a magazine called Pulse HR Magazine, which does all those things that I initially had the idea for. So the whole purpose of it is basically to rebrand the HR profession. In my view, the HR profession is the most important. Of course, I'm biased, but it's the most important profession because it deals with people. So all other professions are basically nurtured or falls under HR. So the whole idea is for us to rebrand HR from the inside out, making HR people realize what is our power, what is our responsibility, enabling them through thought leadership and trends and benchmarking and all of these other things, and training as well. So through that, we reached out to 4-day week to basically, the whole idea was basically to educate the HR community and Namibia's industry to say there's this thing happening that is focusing on productivity and employee well-being, just for them to know. And I think through our interactions, they picked up that we are sort of, there's synergy, and they appointed Pulse HR as the country partner, obviously with me leading it, to trial it out. And what the 4-day week is all about in very simple terms is we are basically looking at how can we work smarter, how can we work better, how can we work faster, and if we're able to do that, can we reduce the amount of time it takes for us to execute work so that we can only work 4 days as opposed to 5? Because the 5-day week and, you know, the sort of 8 to 5 or 9 to whatever is a construct that is about 100 years old. It was never like that. Someone came up with the idea, and we're just asking ourselves to say, is it really working for everyone? You know, there's all these challenges. We can all agree that productivity is not where it should be. We can all agree that employee well-being is terrible at the moment. You know, people are committing suicide, people are burned out, stressed out. So isn't it time that we start asking these questions? And that's what the 4-day week is all about. So we're not saying this is the solution to all of this, but we're saying there's this, can we try it out and see? If it doesn't work, how can we tailor something that would work to solve these problems?
Okay, nice. Yeah, because so it's sort of like a trial run right now. Yeah, I was gonna sort of play the devil's advocate in against it.
Sure, please do. It helps me a lot when people do that. And I keep on telling people that the most interesting conversations I'm having is with my family, because they can look me in the eye and say, I don't think this can work, and then we can have a conversation.
Yeah, it's the same. So the thing is, whenever you're thinking about something, I think the best space you want to be in is knowing the worst negatives and like the best positives, you know. And sometimes if you're the only person thinking it, you might be biased in your way of thinking of someone else, you know. So okay, let's say if the 4-day work week, it's what's the metric that we sort of trying to is it more productivity? Is it people well-being? Is it people's security emotionally? What's the metric of success? How would you know that it's actually successful?
Oh, great. That's a really, really good question. I don't get that one a lot. I think, look, I've even read a newspaper article that says, do we need the 4-day week, or should we rather focus on productivity? 4-day week is a productivity improvement strategy. That's the core of it. At the core of 4-day week, before, and again, that's why people are also saying, but why do we need to work with you? Can't we just try it on our own? Before you do the 4-day week, there's a few things that you need to do. You need to assess the way that you're currently operating, in terms of how you schedule your work, in terms of how many meetings you have, in terms of how things flow, you know, sort of your business processes. So you review those and see, okay, where are the bottlenecks, where are the sort of duplicate processes, non-value adding steps. Then you remove all of that, right? And then you leverage technology as well. And it doesn't have to be buying a system. It's just your existing technology. You can leverage that, especially like things like Microsoft 365. There's a lot that you can do that, you know, to get away with paperwork and basically have it online. So once you do that, and AI as well, AI is like a major tool. Once you do that, automatically it won't take you the same amount of time and effort that it would traditionally take you. So we're then saying, if you reduce it, instead of giving the person more work, incentivize them by giving them a day off. Yeah, because at the moment we rest 2 days, right? And then we work for 5 days. And it's so ingrained in our minds that we don't see anything wrong with it. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but we don't actually think beyond it to say, can we do it differently, you know? Unless we are forced to do it, like what COVID did, and we are forced to realize that actually, when I leave my PC at home, it doesn't mean that I leave my work here. I can actually log in and be on the cloud and stuff like that. The same way that forced us into that situation and experiment, I think it is time that we start testing out these things, especially given that there are benefits to it. So yes, at the core of it is productivity, but then we incentivize people with that additional day off, and that obviously caters for their well-being in terms of having more time to spend with their family, you know, doing the things that they love and so forth. And a lot of people see it as idealistic, because I think it's the mindset thing, right? This is what we've always done, so They're like, oh, but what's wrong with the weekend? Weekend 2 days is enough. But yeah, it's enough. But if we're able to find better ways to do something, shouldn't we explore that? And if we do explore that, why should we give the person more work? Why don't we give them a day off? And, you know, they come back well rested, fresher ideas. And that's what the research is showing. But now we want to see if that is also the case here in Namibia, given our unique set of, you know, circumstances and environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I heard you mention thinking first principles. Yeah. So the first principle is like the idea where you start from the very bottom, like what's at the bottom of something. So I think, in my point of view, or how I would see, if I was to highlight a negative, let's say, so it's like if you start at the bottom, like work versus reward. Basically, there's the formula: the more you work, the more reward you have.
Yeah.
Like, if we're just taking it too simply.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So if we have, like, let's take a scenario. Let's say I'm an employer, right? And I have 2 workers, for instance, and we're building walls. Let's say, and let's say each wall takes us 5 days to build, and the walls, when they finish, when the building process is finished, it costs, let's say, $500, hypothetically. Yeah. And I pay my workers at the end of the day. At the end of the month, okay, let's say per week, it takes us a week to build one wall. One wall is $500. There's 4 weeks, which means at the end of the month we have 4 walls, and it makes us 2,000.
Okay.
I pay my workers 8,000, which means 500 each, and let's say I pay my workers 1,000, 500 each. I'm left with 1,000, right? So now I'm guessing if it's 4 days a week, you still get the same pay. Yeah. Right? It doesn't say your pay goes down.
Yeah,
right?
No, it doesn't.
So now we do it. It takes us 4 days. We have an unfinished wall, right? And the end of the month, we probably have, instead of 4 walls, maybe 3, I guess. And that means the money also goes down, right? Yeah. But I still have to pay my people the same amount. Yeah. But now it's like, I also have stuff to do. I probably have to pay the equipment, the electricity, whatever. So now the only way for me to sort of count for those expenses would be to make the wall maybe 550, right? So that means I've sort of prioritized on my people's well-being, let's say, for them to feel okay, I guess. And then now it's sort of economically, it's everything goes up, right? Because the time it took them to do something has been reduced. The amount that it costs for them to do it stays the same. But now I have to cater for those costs, and I increase everything. Do you think that's how it's going to play out?
Sure.
To some degree.
So like, it's a really good example that you're giving, but obviously this is for a specific industry, right? That's the construction, and a small part of the construction industry. The first thing I would like to say is that I don't have all the solutions, and even with our approach is that we don't come with you and say, this is what you can do. We essentially train the employer and help them design how it can work for them, because the solution lies with the people that actually do the work. They know more than we do. We just give them a framework of thinking around this challenge that they have, to think a bit outside of the box and see how can they tweak it. Will it work for them? Won't it work for them? Right? So I think that's just the first sort of a caveat I'd like to give. So just with that example, for when you're running a construction project, even with a bank or if it's with a private client, you get paid for the progress that you do. So they say, for example, if you lay the foundation, you get 15%. If you come to a window level, you get this much, etc., etc. I'm not an expert, but I just have a general idea of how it works. So we don't get, at the beginning you mentioned first principles, right? So we don't get paid. It's not the more you work, the more you get rewarded. It's the more you produce through the work, the more you get. So it's the productivity. And that's what a lot of people have missed for a very long time. You find people that will clock in the office every day, the correct time, 8 o'clock, clock out at 5 o'clock. But if you look at what are they actually producing in those 40 hours a week, it's a different story. So in essence, somehow the employer has actually been cheating themselves in some instances. So with that example that I gave of, you get paid per progress, same thing can apply for the construction industry. I'm not saying this is a solution, I'm just trying to think, but the solution is with them. Same thing can apply to say, look, if you can bring it to this level at this quality, and you do it in 4 days, then you can have that day off, because they could be working for 2 weeks and not bring it at that level. But if they can bring it to that level in 4 days, then fantastic. But again, you don't just bring it by knowing that there's an additional day off. You need to really think about how you work. I see these videos on TikTok of smart, it's not automated, but people find these smart ways to work, especially in construction. I'm not sure if you've seen it. Find like 4 guys, and instead of this guy walking and doing, they just, and it's more efficient. So that's the whole idea. How do we become more efficient? If we are able to leverage technology or tools and equipment and even AI, fantastic. If we're able to just rethink, Kaizen and continuous improvement, and think about how can we work smarter, faster, better, and less time, then incentivize the person with an additional day off, especially for industries that are really physically taxing. You look at people that work in construction, by the time they're like 50, they've got back problems, they've got all these other social issues that might or might not be related to the work. So if we really think about people holistically and our work differently, I think that's where the key is. But again, I don't have the solutions, but it just takes breaking out of that traditional thinking, looking at things in a fresh, perspective. And I think if we can make it work, that's the one thing also we're agreeing on, even with the people that are sort of debating. If we can make it work, why not? If we can't make it work, and I'm always the first person to say that it won't work for everyone. You look at the mining setup, for example, at least in my view at the moment, unless those guys have a solution to see how they can work a 4-day. But in my view, knowing the setup at the mine, it can't work for them. And that's totally fine. We're not saying it should be the same across the board. But for those people for whom it can work, if we can just break out of that traditional thinking and just test it and see, and then, maybe it can confirm our concerns and say, no, it won't work, then that's totally fine. Then at least we know that it won't work. Then we can start thinking about, if that doesn't work, what can work? Or if it doesn't work now, what needs to be different in order for it to work? Yeah. So it's a very disruptive idea, and I understand that. And my understanding of this responsibility, it's a very mammoth task, especially for a young person to be appointed to try and test this thing out. My understanding of it is that ours is not to convince people, is to inform them that, look, there's this thing happening. Those that want to try it out, we try it out. And also to avoid as far as possible, not to have this binary ideas and, sort of a separation. Oh, I'm for it, I'm against it. That's why a lot of people ask, no, why don't you do a national debate? And people talk, I said, that's not what we're here to do. I think there's a few fundamental things that we all agree on. I think we should more be thinking about, if this doesn't work, what would work? And not be just limited to say 4-day work doesn't work. Let's think about productivity. Let's think about well-being. We acknowledge that there's a problem. What can work if 4-day doesn't work? And if 4-day can't work now, when can it work? And what do we need to start working towards in order to make that a reality?
Yeah. Nice. No, true. I like sort of like the mind frame that you approaching it with, because obviously, if you're looking at it from a distance, there's a lot of, in everything that you decide to do. I think what stops people from doing things is they would have an idea, let's say a business or whatever, and then before they even start the idea, they sort of play out the whole thing in their head. But you play out, oh, what if I do this and it doesn't work? And then you just give up, and you say, but the reality is there's some things that sort of just play out in real life by themselves, so like there was a saying, someone says, in most of the, what makes most companies excel is the rate of experimentation. So the quicker 100%. You can experiment, the quicker you can fail. At least you now know that, okay, that was something 100%. That we decided to do. Maybe it doesn't work, but there were certain things in this thing that did work. Maybe we can use it to do something else. So I do like that it's not just, oh, let's do the 4-day week, but it's sort of like a experimentation that you take. So that's a good approach to take. Obviously, there is people get burned out. Obviously, because the more, I'm sure if we were to work 7 days a week, you would be less productive.
100%.
So if you cut it down to 6 days a week, you cut it down to 5 to 4. So you can assume that the less days you have, the more fresh you are to work. So I think from that perspective, it
I think there's a law. I'm not sure if it's the law of diminishing returns, but there is a principle sort of that says you can only be, optimum productivity, and then after that it stays the same, and then after that it starts dropping. And this is why I'm saying that actually when we think about it, employers have actually been cheating themselves for just making sure that you clock in, and now people have biometrics, you clock in, you're there. It's called presenteeism. You're there, but what are you producing?
Exactly.
So it's about time. And the challenge is, how do you measure productivity? And just because it's a challenge doesn't mean that we need to shy away from it. We need to actually start and try and see, how can we measure someone's output and productivity? It's like in consulting, for example. And I think maybe this is sort of, we can borrow from this mindset for permanent employment as well. In consulting, if I am tasked to develop policies for a company, we agree on the timelines, but I don't get paid for every hour. I can probably bill per hour, but I get paid for the output. And one of the first things that we learn in human resources is the sort of different types of remuneration. You get hourly, you get, I can't remember the exact names, but if you produce 4 of these, you get paid for each one that you produce, etc., etc. And I think as HR people and generally as companies, we've just gotten stuck into this hour thing, Monday to Friday, 8 to what, without really thinking about the output. And you find that a lot of organizations, one of the government officials was the first to say, we've got a productivity issue. If we implement this thing, I think they were talking from a point of thinking that we just give people a day off and they're rested and they come back, but without considering the fact that it's productivity is at the core of it. So a lot of people are sort of acknowledging that there's a productivity issue, but we're shying away because we don't have the answers. And like you rightfully said, a lot of the companies, but even beyond companies, a lot of the countries that are progressing, you look at Singapore, you look at Japan, you look at China, in Africa, probably Kenya and Rwanda at the top of that. It's all about experimenting. It's all about innovating, trying out things. I'm sure from 100 things that China has tried to do, probably 20 worked. But from those 20, there was probably one that had like exponential, just a boom. And I think it's the sort of culture and mindset that we need to start having in Namibia now that we're moving into industrialization and even into, automation and technology and so forth. We need to create an enabling environment where we can try things, learn from them, and especially evidence-based things and not just opinions and how our feelings and how things have played out in the past. The example that I gave you to say I had this idea about 10 years ago, or, when I graduated, if I was in that mindset, like it won't work, then I wouldn't have been able to do this. But it's always just, okay, it won't work now, maybe, but what can I, it's about experimenting, innovating and trying out until you find that spark and that thing that actually moves. But if we take a more sort of, conservative and just let's do what we know works, we're going to lag behind, because now the world is changing. The world is changing. So even 4-day, if it's not going to be implemented now, we're going to be ready for it when it gets implemented 10 years, because we've got the data and the research.
True. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. What's your relationship with work-life balance, and how do you perceive that? Because obviously there's most people would say there's a balance between your work and your life. But if you want to prioritize on excellence, for instance, you would see like your Elon Musk and people like that, they sort of don't have that relationship. It's sort of like work becomes you. And I also guess it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing something that you don't necessarily like you just go to work because you want to survive, or because it's where your lot has fallen upon you, to do that specific thing. But it's not something that you're passionate about. So maybe, do you think that's where work-life balance kind of makes sense? But if it's something that it's a passion thing, it's almost like you don't stop working. It's just you, there's work, which is you, basically.
Exactly, yeah. It's a really good question. In terms of what the relationship is, it's non-existent. It hasn't been for myself for a very long time. Partly, two reasons. Partly, it was a conscious decision. Not, of course, I didn't take a decision not to have a life, but I just dedicated myself to my work to learn as much as possible so I can have a steep learning curve and move up much faster. So it's sort of a sacrifice, and my family always used to complain. It's like, do you even care about us? So I think for the first decade of my career, I've been in HR for about 13 years now. I really just dedicated myself to my craft and learning as much as possible and contributing and adding value. And that has really helped me to grow in terms of my skill and my value, but also to grow and move up in terms of the ladder. Became a manager at a very, very young age, and I don't think I would have been able to do that if I just stuck to the working hours. So I had to work a lot of late nights and early mornings. And then the second reason is, I think, the passion. And this is the part that I don't like so much, because to be honest with you, it doesn't feel like work when I'm working. My family looks at me, it's like, are you taking out your laptop again? We're going to the coast. What's happening? But it doesn't feel like work because the drive is there all the time, but obviously it's not healthy, and I have had burnout before. Actually, ironically, during COVID. Can you believe it? I think this is where everyone was having a great time. But I really saw it as a great opportunity for me to just, execute some projects and stuff. Next thing I know, because now there's no 8 to 5 or going home, I'm home working all the time. I realized later, I can't even do anything. Ideas, I can't execute. I'm that tired. So I think work-life balance is very important. And I got this new perspective. I saw a graphic the other day. It had a big circle, and then it said work in the big circle, and a small circle that said life. And then there was another picture. The big circle was life, and then the small was, work. And I think to really design sort of work-life balance and even going beyond balance, because work is something that happens within the life. And it's not like you just work and then you have a weekend, because that's how a lot of people, maybe a lot of them won't acknowledge it. That's how a lot of us are living, 5 days, work, 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 and then you've got a small weekend. That's when you want to see family.
So I usually ask this question at the end, for the guest to sort of give advice to the previous version of themselves. Which, by doing that, you will automatically be advising people that can relate to you. Some stuff. If you were to give advice to yourself, previous version of just what would you say?
Well, it's a tricky one, man. Probably to... It's a tough one. I think we think big. I grew up in a very small town. When you grow up in a small town, the beauty of it is that you cannot prepare to be a global citizen, because you learn to love and appreciate other people's cultures and so forth. But the challenge is that you're sort of limited in the boundaries of that town. I grew up in Walvis Bay, and I only really came to Windhoek for varsity. That's the first time I came to Windhoek. So all I knew was Walvis Bay. So even my ambitions and my goals were sort of really, really small. So the advice that I would give to myself and to other young people, especially from a small town or a village, is just think big. Now the world is connected. Shoot your shot. Think out of the box. Don't be limited by your environment.
Yeah. Great. This was very fun. Fun having you.
Yeah, same here, man.
Yeah, it's obviously a lot of things that people can, pick up from this. And if someone wants to reach out to you, can they reach out?
I'm not really big on social media, but yeah, on LinkedIn, shoot me a DM on LinkedIn. Yeah, mostly LinkedIn. If you see me around, I'm a chill guy. People say I look unapproachable, but I'm like a really chill person. So just come by, have a conversation, and I'm always happy to meet new people and learn from other people as well, and see how I can help and add value to whatever they're doing.
Thanks, man.
Sure. Great, man. It was great. Sure.